Chapter 14 Scrap of Light. When 1944 arrived, we did nothing in the camp to mark the new year. Maybe the camp guards and the police had extra food. Maybe they toasted one another's good health. For us, it was a usual Friday night. I went to bed and tried to sleep. I tried not to think of the possibility of spending another year making bombs for Hitler. Ukrainian Christmas Eve was the following Thursday, and those of us in Barrack 7 sang hymns together as we lay in our bunks, shivering under our covers. Just a year ago, I had been with Larissa and my grandmother. Back then, I thought things couldn't get worse. I was an orphan, after all. Looking back now, I realized how I should have been thankful for all that we had. Not much food, no parents, but a roof over our heads and the love of our grandmother. As January blizzards blew outside, I was grateful for my shoes. In the factory, the man behind the glass stopped paying so much attention to us. He would bring in the daily newspaper and read every page. I would glance over and see him engrossed in the latest news from the front, not looking our way for 15 minutes at a time. Every once in a while, he would leave. Sometimes he would be gone for only a minute or so, but there were times when he was gone for half a day. We sensed the war was turning very bad for the Nazis. Some of the changes were subtle. German supervisors in the factory simply stopped showing up. In their place would be German housewives who seemed wholly unprepared for the job they were supposed to do. Or boys in Hitler Youth uniforms who were eager but untrained. I lived in hope that the man behind the glass would abandon his post as well. But although his absences became longer, and he paid scant attention to us while he was there, he always seemed to eventually come back. But in those times that he was gone, we had the opportunity for sabotage. Each morning we filled our pockets with dirt from the camp. Then, even with the supervisor reading the newspaper, it was possible to slip my hand into my pocket and fill the metal bowl with dirt instead of gunpowder. Natalia's trick could only be done when the supervisor was gone. She would dampen the inside cavities of the bomb with the icy fluid. The gunpowder that was inserted after that was spoiled, we hoped. One morning we came in and the supervisor was gone. On his desk was a day-old newspaper and a dirty coffee cup. Perhaps he would finally not come in at all. We used his early absence to sabotage bombshell after bombshell. Natalia gave the barrel of gunpowder a good soaking with her cooling fluid. She sprayed fluid all over the straw-like cordette as well. We made the bombs out of this destroyed material and included scraps of paper upon which Bibi wrote in several languages, "Dear Allies, this is all we can do for you now." Shortly before lunch, the supervisor came in. We had just closed up one of the bombs we'd tampered with. I had a hard time keeping my face serious. I felt so exultant. I was positively giddy with the fact that we had succeeded in destroying so many bombs. Had he bothered to glance into our room, he might have noticed the cordette glistening, but he didn't look. Instead, he opened up his briefcase with trembling fingers and began frantically stuffing papers into it from his desk. Without glancing at us even once, he left, stray papers fluttering behind him. With him gone, we continued to make fake bombs. At midday, we joked together as we hung up our smocks, then washed up as usual. I was grateful when the kitchen worker came in with our soup. So many Germans seemed to be fleeing. Our turnip soup was not filling, but it was the only thing keeping us alive. Just as I held a spoonful of watery turnips to my lips, the room was enveloped in a loud boom. A gust of air whooshed in from above with such force that it blew me out of my chair. My spoon flew out of my hand and smacked against the wall. I scrambled to my feet, trying to make sense of what had just happened. When I looked up at the ceiling, my heart stood still. Where gray ceiling tiles should have been, there was a huge star-shaped hole. And that's when I looked immediately below the hole, our table. Sticking up in the middle of it was the narrow end of a small bomb, fins pointing upward. Time stood still. For one long moment I stared at that bomb, comparing it to the ones we were making. This was similar in size and color, but teardrop-shaped instead of oblong. All at once it came to my senses. This was a bomb that had been dropped on us. It hadn't exploded yet. "Out!" I screamed. "Now!" The other girls seemed as stunned and confused as I was. I scrambled to my feet and ran to the door that connected our room to the catwalk above the factory. I pulled on the handle mercifully. It was unlocked. Xenia, Mary, Bibi, Natalia, Katerina, and I flew out, yanking the door closed behind us. We stumbled down the catwalk as quickly as our feet would take us. When we were nearly at the other end of the factory, the ground shook so violently that I was knocked off my feet. My friends tumbled around me. I turned to look. The force of the explosion had blasted our lunchroom door off its hinges. Hot air and flames licked down the catwalk towards us. "Get up, up, up!" screamed Katerina, pulling on my arms. I stumbled to my feet, as did Xenia behind me. Mary was the farthest down the catwalk, and she got to the exit door first. She pulled it open, and we all tumbled out into the main entryway of the factory and collapsed in a heap, smoke billowing out behind us. Hands pulled at us. Air raid sirens blared, but I could hear the rumble of brick and mortar falling around us. All at once I gulped in cold, fresh air. I looked up and counted. All 6 of us were there. We had miraculously survived the bombing. Young boys with Hitler Youth armbands herded us away from the building and told us to stand with factory workers from the main wing. We milled about, shocked and frightened, blood trickling from our wounds. I took huge gulping breaths to calm myself and willed myself not to cry. Xenia and Bibi were standing a few feet apart from the other workers, pointing to parts of the factory. I turned to look and gasped. 1/3 of it had been bombed flat. And where our bomb room had been was now a hollowed-out shell. My first thought was one of frustration. All those sabotaged bombs had been destroyed. All that trickery for nothing. My second thought was exhalation. Maybe the bombs didn't get used. But I was sure we had saved many laborers' lives here today by wetting the gunpowder. But then I wondered, how long would it take the officers in charge to realize that had those bombs been real, they'd have exploded when the Allied bomb hit, and the damage would have been far worse than this? What would they do to us when they realized what we had done to the German bombs. I looked over at Xenia. She met my eyes and nodded slightly. She was wondering the same thing. "You, out of the way!" I looked up. A Nazi officer with an impatient frown on his face was pushing his way through. His black dress uniform was crisply pressed, and his boots and brass were so polished that they sparkled in the sunlight despite the smoke. He seemed out of place in the burning rubble. "You and you," he pointed to the couple of the older Hitler Youth. "Get the first aid kit. You," he said, turning to a factory supervisor. "Where is the fire hose?" Katerina limped over to where I stood and leaned heavily against my side. I sprained my ankle. In the haze of the smoke, I saw slashes of red. Natalia's scalp had been cut in Mary's hand. A long black car sat idling at the entrance of the factory. The officers, I assumed. I watched as the glass in the rear window rolled down. A woman, her blonde curls styled to perfection, stuck her head out. "Franz," she called out, "we will be late for the rally." The officer glanced her way, then waved his gloved hand as if warding off a fly. The woman's head disappeared into the depths of the car. A young girl with blonde braids looked out the window. She said something to someone inside. A second blonde head appeared. A sight of her stopped my heart. But where had I seen her before? Right at that moment, she squinted. Her eyes locked onto mine. A look of panic transformed her face, and she stretched out her arms to me. She had something that was lost in the tumult, but her lips seemed to say, "Lida, please don't leave me." Was I dreaming? I waved, too stunned to take even a step toward her. She waved back. Suddenly, both blonde heads disappeared. I could see a woman scolding them as the window rolled up. Could that have been Larissa? My Larissa? But in the car of a Nazi officer? No. How could it possibly have been my sister?